Welcome to Learner's Planet, students. In the previous session, we studied about some animals, some group of animals based upon their feeding habits. They were divided into three, out of which we studied about the two, that's herbivores and carnivores. So we'll continue the group of animals based upon their feeding habits in this session. So this is session 4 about food. So let's start with the third major category of animals, which is based upon their feeding habits, and that are omnivores. So let's study about omnivores, and first of all we will see that what are omnivores. Yes, students, animals that eat either other animals or plants are called or termed as omnivores or omnivorous animals, right? So how do they consume their food? How do they get their food? Some omnivores hunt and eat their food, like carnivores, as we saw in the carnivores only. Like herbivores eat plant and plant parts, right? So they do not have to hunt for their food, right? But carnivores have to hunt for their food, like we saw many of them, like hunters, scavengers, and predators. In the same way, there are some omnivores that hunt and eat their food, like carnivores, and they also eat other herbivores and other animals, right? So in short, we can say that they are both, like herbivores and carnivores type, right? So some omnivores are scavengers, right? They do not hunt, but they feed on the dead animals and they eat the dead matter, right? There are some or many omnivores that eat eggs from the other animals, right? So there are some omnivores, there are scavengers and other omnivores that eat plants, but not all the kinds of plants or not all the kinds of the part of the plants, right? So unlike herbivores, omnivores cannot digest some of the substances in grains or other parts of the plant that do not produce fruit, right? So these are actually termed as omnivores. This is the main difference between the omnivores and the herbivores, right? Herbivores are able to digest some of the substances in grains, right? And they can directly consume the food in this form. But there are some omnivores that cannot digest some of the substances in the grains, and that is why they do not eat all kinds of plants. They eat only some parts of the plant, right? So they can eat, omnivores can eat fruits and vegetables, and some of the insect omnivores are also there, which are termed as pollinators. So what are actually pollinators, students? An animal that causes plants to make fruit or seeds, which are very important to the life cycle of some kinds of plants, are called pollinators, right? So some insects, what they will do? Pollinators means an animal that causes the plants to make fruit, right? They will take the nectar they will suck the nectar or the juice from the plant, right? So these are some of the insect omnivores like honeybee, right? Now let's see some other omnivores also and their different feeding habits. Yes, there are some omnivores like black bears that do not hunt for meat, but if they happen to come across any dead animal, they eat it, right? So these are also a type of omnivores that do not hunt, means they are not hunters, but they are termed as the scavengers, because if they happen to come across any dead animal, they eat it, just like scavengers, right? So in and all, we can say that some animals eat both plants and animals, and omnivores includes mammals like bears, raccoons, and birds like crow, woodpecker, etc. Right? So for example, we saw most of the black bear's diet consists of plants, as in summer months it eats grasses, herbs, sedges, fruits, berries and nuts. But it also eats insects, right? Like we saw one such example of black bear, right? And we also saw an example of, we will now see example of other bear also, right? So, because they eat plants and animals, omnivores survive very well in many environments, right? Because any kind of food can be consumed by omnivores. There are some kind of foods which cannot be digested by omnivores, so they will not consume them. So some omnivores like raccoon and seagull have no problem adapting to living near humans, because they often dig through garbage cans and gardens to find their food, right? And unlike the black bear, grizzly bear is a hunter. As black bear is a scavenger, there is another kind of bear called as grizzly bear, that is a hunter. So we can say that all bears are also not the same, as all bears are omnivores, but all bears are not same, right? So grizzly bear is such a type of bear, or such a type of carnivore which is very good at catching fish, and it often uses its long claws to dig the insects out of the rotting logs, right? Rotting logs of the wood, and small mammals out of their burrows, like rats, like rodents, right? So the primary food source for another type of bear, that is polar bear, is seal, right? So polar bear, you can find polar bear around some water region, right? So its food is seal. It also eats fish, seabirds and sometimes reindeer. In the summer it also eats berries and other plants. So this kind of variety we can see in omnivores, right? And also we can see the variety in different animals which belong to the same category called omnivores, right? So we saw one such example of bears, the species of bears, right? There are some other omnivores like humans, right? We humans are also omnivores. Why? Because our teeth are also designed in such a way that we can eat both plants and meat. Not only just meat, but other animals' flesh, right? Probably we can say, particularly we can say other animals' delights, right? Between the omnivores like us and other animals is that the teeth of omnivores are not as specialized as carnivores or omnivores. Sorry, carnivores or herbivores, right? Carnivores have different type of teeth. They can eat only flesh, right? And herbivores are such that their teeth are adapted in such a way that they can only consume, or they can only eat plant or plant products, right? But teeth of omnivores are not same or not specialized as carnivores or herbivores, but it is designed, or it is specialized in such a way, or it is adapted in such a way that it can eat both plants and meat, right? So there are some other facts about omnivores, like humans, that is our front teeth, that is humans' front teeth help us rip into meat and bite into fruits and vegetables. Our molars help us to grind up the meat and chew the fruits and vegetables, right? So our molars are very helpful for such kind of chewing and grinding up. And even many omnivorous animals also have teeth that help them to eat both plants and animals, right? So we can say, as omnivores eat both plants and animals or their flesh, they have a well-balanced diet, right? Like a pig is an omnivore that will eat anything, anything. Pigs can eat worms, insects, tree bark, and something very rubbish. And sometimes pigs also eat other pigs also, right? So omnivores are very different category from carnivores and herbivores, right? So we saw this interesting type of group of animals. Now let's move on to the next group of animals, which are called as decomposers. Yes, so what is meant by decomposers? Yes, students, the organisms that break down the dead or decaying matter are called decomposers. Means they will decompose the food, they will decompose this matter, and then they can consume it in their form, right? Like when plants and animals die, they become food for the decomposers. So we can say that dead plants and animals are the food for decomposers, like bacteria, fungi, and earthworms, right? So these are some of the examples of the decomposers, or we can say it as saprotrophs, right? Because decomposers or the saprotrophs have some ability with which they can decompose this dead and decaying matter. So let's see some of the property of decomposers. Yes, decomposers recycle the dead plants and animals into chemical nutrients. Chemical nutrients means which type of chemical nutrients? Like carbon and nitrogen, right? So they will recycle the dead plants and animals into carbon and nitrogen, and this carbon and nitrogen are released back into the soil, air and water and consumed by other organisms. Like we can see many examples like fungi like mushrooms, mildew, molds, toadstools. They are not plants, they are fungi. Why they are categorized as fungi and why they are not considered as plants? Because they do not have chlorophyll, so that they cannot make their own food. Because without chlorophyll they will not be able to make their food, and that is why they are not categorized into the plants, right? So they cannot make their own food. Then how do they obtain food? Yes, fungi have such a property of absorbing the nutrients from other organisms. They decompose, right? So the decomposed organisms will provide nutrients to the fungi. How? Fungi will absorb the nutrients from these decomposed matter. So you will be amazed to know that there are over 50,000 species of fungi, and most fungi are very, very small in size, right? There are many other fungi that are very helpful in many ways, like some fungi like mushrooms, yeast, etc. are edible, means eatable, or they are used in making food also, right? So there are many other fungi which are very useful, and there are fungi which are very harmful also. So depending upon their harmness, depending upon their property of being harmful and being useful, they are used, right? So let's see another best example of the decomposer. Yes, the other best example of decomposer is bacteria. What is actually bacteria? Bacteria is such a kind of organism which can be found everywhere, right? Different types of bacteria can be found, right? Not all the types of bacteria can be found at one single place. They can be found everywhere and in a very varied form. That means variety of bacteria can be found. So what are actually bacteria? They are the smallest forms of life on earth, and they are so very small that they cannot be seen with naked eye or the aided eye. They can be seen only through the help of or with the help of microscope, right? So There are many such bacteria that live in water, they live in the air and also on the land. Bacteria are the smallest forms, and in fact, we may have up to 100 million of bacteria in our body right now. Like, some bacteria are harmful and they can cause disease like typhoid and cholera, and other bacteria are helpful in such a way that they do not cause any kind of disease. So we can say, just like the fungi, bacteria are also helpful and harmful, right? So we have bacteria in our digestive tract that kills more harmful bacteria, right? They have the ability to kill more harmful bacteria. And there are some organisms like sheep, deer, etc., and they have bacteria in their stomach that help them to digest plants, right? So bacteria are harmful as well as they are very beneficial. Like, they are beneficial in other ways, like bacteria helps to turn the milk into cheese and even cucumbers into pickles, and other bacteria helps to decompose dead plants and animals. And the importance of these decomposers is that decomposers and scavengers both have the ability to break down the dead plants and animals, and they also break down the waste of other organisms like feces and excreta of other animals or other organisms. So decomposers in and all are very important in nature. They are very important for our environment because they balance the environment, just like carnivores, herbivores and omnivores, right? But without these organisms like decomposers, our planet would be covered with dead plants and animals. There will be nothing to decompose them. So we can say that decomposers also play a very important role in balancing the nature, right? As you know, that scavengers are the animals that find dead animals or plants and eat them. While they eat them, they break down these dead and decaying matter into small bits. Example, flies, wasps and cockroaches, they all are scavengers. In the same way, earthworms are also scavengers, but they only break down the plants, right? Once a scavenger is done with this process, the decomposers take over the food and they finish their job. So in and all, we can say that decomposers and scavengers simultaneously or hand by hand, they both break down the dead plants and animals. And there are many kinds of decomposers which are microscopic, means they cannot be seen with naked eye. And others like fungi, like decomposers, can be seen, but bacteria cannot be seen, right? So some of the decomposers are microscopic and some are macroscopic, means they can be seen. Alright. So students, I hope that you learned many things about the feeding habits of the different animals, having different feeding habits, and also you enjoyed this session knowing about decomposers and omnivores, very interesting type of group, right? So we'll meet in the next session. Till then, keep learning and keep enjoying.